I cannot tell you how many startups are in Canada and say, we got tired of calling on Canadian corporations because they just let us on, like it was meeting after meeting after meeting. We went down to the US and we sold much more very quickly. And to me, what I would say to Canadian corporations is, I am not suggesting that you work more with startups as a give back. I actually think you should do it because it's in your own best interest. And if you want to get that innovation, and if you want to innovate as quickly as your US competitors are innovating, you need to embrace startups and figure out how you can work with them.
Resources, are limited, and founders are getting frustrated with the lack of speed, getting resources potentially from other municipalities sort of cobbled together to be shared in other spaces, et cetera, versus coming together and saying, okay, we're going to create a really fantastic how to start up 101 guide that all of these various groups are going to work on together. We'll have one source of truth, have an anchored, tested, fantastic resource. Instead, so many folks are building net new things over and over and over again, which requires a lot of time and energy.
Hello, and welcome to Future Forward on TheFutureEconomy.ca, a conversation series with Canadian experts where we delve into the pivotal forces shaping Canada's future economy. I'm your host, Sasha Krstic, President of Mastercard Canada. Today's episode shines a spotlight on the dynamic engine of growth that is startups. Startups are the heartbeat of our economic future. They are the engines of change, the vessels of innovation, and the birthplaces of tomorrow's giants. Helping them grow and ensure they can make a lasting home in Canada is crucial to our future economy's success. While Canada is turning out more tech startups than ever before, the recent global economic downturn has impacted their funding opportunities, with Q1 2023 investments dropping by 83% compared to the same time period in 2022. On this episode, I'm joined by Kayla Isabelle, CEO of Startup Canada, and Janet Bannister, founder and managing partner of Staircase Ventures. Today, Kayla, Janet, and I will explore the state of the startup economy in Canada and identify calls to action for industry, government, and key stakeholders across Canada on what must be done now and by who to ensure that Canada's startups are successful and remain competitive in Canada and beyond. Welcome, Kayla. Welcome, Janet. Let's get to it. Kayla, I'm going to start with you and a question around, in your role as CEO of Startup Canada, are there any industry segments or verticals that you're seeing that are dominating the startup space in Canada?
To me, the industries that we're really seeing the most substantial growth and potential for growth are in healthcare, technology, and agriculture. And the reason for this, from my perspective, is really echoed internationally, that these sectors are focusing on some of our most pressing core needs of both our Canadian population and globally. And so that's where we need to see more investment, to ensure that those companies are scaling and that Canada becomes sort of that leader across those various spaces.
I do want to switch, Janet, to you and ask you, as founder and managing partner of Staircase Ventures, given the fact that startups amount to 12% of Canada's GDP, so a big number, it's meaningful, but it could be more. What are some of the biggest challenges you see Canadian entrepreneurs experiencing today that might be hindering their growth?
One of the common challenges that I have seen in Canada is that there is not a lot of leadership talent in Canada that has grown a tech business from, say, 50 to 100 million in sales to 500 million in sales or $1 billion in sales. And that is where I see we need more people who have done that. There's not enough of them to have that flywheel effect of having, those senior leaders who are able to take the company to that next level.
And what's the implication of that, Janet, if we don't have that senior leadership that has the experience in scaling and can pass that down to up and coming tech companies? What does that mean for those companies, and what does that mean for Canada and our economy?
So, it's interesting. I was actually having a conversation with somebody just the other day. So what we see with these companies in Canada is when they don't have the leadership to scale it, then a couple of things happen. Either they sell out too early, and then, that company is sold, often to a US company. Or what happens is they say, hey, we want to continue growing, but we're going to hire our senior executives in the US because we need people who have done this before. And then the challenge with that is, even if the CEO remains in Canada, or you have some people, or even the tech talent team, you will move more and more of the leadership or the senior leadership outside Canada. And then those people are going to hire people underneath them that, generally speaking, are in their city. So if that next generation, we're losing the opportunity to create that next generation of managers who can do that, because those leaders are not in Canada. Canada is great in the research. You look at our research institutions, whether that be in technology or healthcare, drug discovery, all of that, it's very strong in terms of the research. But we have not, in general, there are exceptions for sure, but in general, we have not been able to translate that research into development. And I would argue it's because it's a different skill set, right? There's one skill set to do the research. There's another skill set to say, hey, let's take this to market and build a huge company around it. And I think that's the leadership we need more of in Canada.
That is such a critical point. In my previous conversation with Goldie Hyder, president of the Business Council of Canada, he drew on exactly this challenge for Canada. We have great technology, we have great talent, we have smart people who have brilliant ideas, but when it comes to scaling, we miss out of the opportunity to the US. And I love the way that you have connected it to the importance of growing our next generation of tech leaders, that flywheel and that circle. We're clearly not maximizing that in Canada today. And I'm curious in terms of what you're seeing around the diversity of our entrepreneurs, not the ideas or the sectors, but the actual individuals. And how is Canada doing with respect to, does our entrepreneurship reflect the diversity of Canadian society today? Any groups overrepresented, any groups underrepresented?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it blends beautifully to Janet's kind of see it, be it mentality as well, that if you're not seeing a diverse community of later stage founders that have successfully scaled these incredible businesses, how are you going to potentially see yourself in that mix growing if, it's a women-led venture, or if you're a Black founder or an Indigenous founder, et cetera. I think we struggle in using very few examples and illustrations of very diverse founders as sort of these Canadian success stories. And yes, we want to be pointing to, some of those folks, but we need to make sure that all of the stories that we're telling are beyond just three, women-led ventures, Indigenous ventures, and, Black-led ventures, et cetera. I think when it comes to women in particular, this is a conversation I probably have daily when it comes to investment, and I'm sure Janet has as well, that we need to see women-led ventures scale. They are profitable. They are incredible businesses. There is no shortage of talent and energy and entrepreneurial horsepower propelling these businesses forward. But we need to see more investment going and measuring that investment over longer periods of time to help women-led ventures grow. We need to see more representation across a wider variety of sectors as well. We see women dominating in particular spaces, or not even quite dominating, but working potentially more in community in some of those spaces. We need to see that diversified, so more women are in tech, in STEM, looking at lots of other spaces. When we look at other areas of diversity, I want to be very specific and almost naming them individually, because I think part of the challenge is we sort of cluster it all under this diversity umbrella and say that it's one large community.
It's much more nuanced.
It's so much more nuanced, and the barriers are nuanced as well. And we're starting to get so much more research about what those nuanced barriers are and the intersectionality of identity as well. If we look at Indigenous women and looking at those additional hurdles and barriers, there's so much texture in that lived experience. When we look at folks with a disability and people with a disability, I think this is a huge space we could see more growth and innovation, not just in promoting entrepreneurs with a disability, but having entrepreneurs with a disability build products and services for their community, by their community, and seeing investment go to those types of ventures. I think of, Maya and Ziv and incredible founders who are sort of paving that way and giving us some models, but there's more in that space. We've been sort of feeling this energy and this chronic gap for years, but we now actually have research to back a lot of those tensions and pain points that gives us a bit of more of a roadmap moving forward to make sure that we see some more of those ventures scaling and improve relationships with financial institutions. That is, a key barrier to many of these folks.
Janet, you were Venture Capital Journal's 2021 Women of Influence in Private Market. You were also PitchBook's 2021 Female Founders and investors to know. And the statistics show, though, that only 17% of Canadian small and medium businesses are owned by women. So, question is, why?
If you look at the data, women-owned businesses have a higher success rate and tend to do more with less capital. So it's not an issue of women-owned businesses are failing. No, the issue is that not enough women are starting businesses. And so we need to do more to get women to start businesses. And I think that starts in our schools. What I'm saying is true for women. I think, frankly, it's true for men as well, because we need more entrepreneurship in general. And so, having had a son who just completed high school, like high schools are not teaching entrepreneurship as a desirable career path. And I think that is a miss in our schools.
I want to switch back to the theme of how larger businesses and governments can help entrepreneurs develop their skills and the supports needed to scale their operations and ultimately succeed. Because I think one thing we can agree on is every small business or every entrepreneur that starts a business has a dream of scaling. So I'd like to ask the both of you a little bit deeper perspective on what are the roles of big business, what are the roles of government, academia, stakeholders. We now have an opportunity to say, here's the to-do list for Canadians interested in helping new businesses scale. What would we add to that to-do list to make sure that entrepreneurs can succeed?
Yeah, money. We'd love to see the money. And I would love to see as those funds get invested, what are the results from those investments and having better data on where that funding is going. So I think partnerships with crowns, with government, with ecosystem players also involved. It's beautiful to see everybody really rally together and make sure founders hear about these opportunities as well, because there's so much information out there to be processing.
One is for Canadian corporations to buy more from startups. I cannot tell you how many startups are in Canada and say, we got tired of calling on Canadian corporations because they just let us on, like it was meeting after meeting after meeting. We went down to the US and we sold much more very quickly. And to me, what I would say to Canadian corporations is, I am not suggesting that you work more with startups as a give back. I actually think you should do it because it's in your own best interest. And if you want to get that innovation, and if you want to innovate as quickly as your US competitors are innovating, you need to embrace startups and figure out how you can work with them. So that's what I would say on corporations. Interestingly, when we talk to entrepreneurs and when you look at sort of the survey results, the number one request from entrepreneurs is fewer regulatory hurdles, less red tape, make it easier for us to start a business, to, as I said, get through all of the regulations, whether they be general or whether they be industry specific red tape that burdens down small businesses. Kayla mentioned investments, and the importance of investments is, it's interesting if you look at our pension plans, such as the Canadian Pension Plan and other government pension plans, whether they be at the provincial level or otherwise, a lot of those pension plans invest very little or next to nothing in Canada and in Canadian businesses. And again, this is not a new idea, but I think the question needs to be asked, hey, if should they be investing more in Canadian businesses? I know certainly the CDPQ in Quebec invests quite a bit, and part of their mandate is to invest in the development of the Quebec economy.
Kayla, anything to add?
One is reducing the redundancy. I think there's so much information out there for founders to be navigating if they're starting up, scaling up, whatever stage of their entrepreneurial journey they're at. And what I've heard and found from different levels of government in particular is often resources are limited, and founders are getting frustrated with the lack of speed, getting resources potentially from other municipalities sort of cobbled together to be shared in other spaces, et cetera, versus coming together and saying, okay, we're going to create a really fantastic how to start up 101 guide that all of these various groups are going to work on together. We'll have one source of truth, have an anchored, tested, fantastic resource. Instead, so many folks are building net new things over and over and over again, which requires a lot of time and energy. And then focusing on the navigation. How can we have a better roadmap to showcase, hey, founder, you're in this industry, you're looking for this type of support. Here is who you can access across that continuum to make sure you're not wasting your time just researching up the wazoo every possible organization that sort of lives under the sun.
I have to say, I feel conflicted by this conversation today because on one hand, there is so much potential, there's so much passion, there's so many examples of strong startups and entrepreneurial spirit in Canada. And on the other, we talk about, losing our leadership capacity to the US, not being able to, move our red tape or be really efficient in supporting entrepreneurs. And it shows up in the way our ecosystem ranks globally. We've dropped from 13th place in 2019 to 17th place in 2023. And so it really is sort of this kind of coming together of how do we put the practice into reality of scaling. And so I have peppered you with a number of questions today. And my last question is going to be, if there's one question that you wish I had asked you that I didn't ask on this important topic of scaling entrepreneurship in Canada, what is the question I should have asked you?
I would say my question would be, what advice would you have for people who are considering an entrepreneurial path or who are early in their entrepreneurial journey? And for those people, I would say, Sasha, to your points around that you raised, nothing worth doing is easy, right? And entrepreneurship is certainly not an easy path based on living in Silicon Valley for 4 years. What struck me there, and actually it's supported by the data, but there was an extremely strong entrepreneurial spirit and much less fear of failure. And failure was embraced as something to learn from and to grow from. And I think in Canada, there's more of a stigma around failure. And I think there generally is a less risk appetite. I would say to all the entrepreneurs who are in the process of launching a business, one of my biggest pieces of advice for you would be to surround yourself with people who have walked that path before and are a few steps ahead. Build networks, build support systems, and build friendships with people who are further ahead, who can provide you with guidance and perspective. And that it's just critically important as you go down that journey.
Fabulous insight. Thanks, Janet.
That's a reshare of everything Janet just mentioned. I couldn't have said it better myself. Completely agree with all of that sentiment. And one reflection I would like to leave the viewers here today is, who are you not hearing from in your day-to-day when it comes to entrepreneurship? We often get stuck in these sort of silos or listening to people who sound and look and have similar backgrounds to us. When you think of your networks, who you're amplifying, who you're supporting, who are you not seeing in your day-to-day, and making an active intention to diversify the folks that are in your orbit to share more of an empathetic sort of positioning.
Well, Kayla, Janet, you have moved me from conflicted to inspired. Despite some of the challenges that our entrepreneurs and our startups are facing, we really do have all the right ingredients in Canada. And I think it couldn't be clearer that this needs to be a collective team effort. We've got incredible entrepreneurs that will start the businesses, but it will come across education, corporations, government to really work together to help ensure that our entrepreneurs can scale and, most importantly, stay in Canada and launch great scale from Canada. So let me thank you both for an insightful discussion today. I'm confident that our viewers are coming out of this discussion with a better understanding of the role that startups play in shaping Canada's economy, that building inclusivity in the startup space is of critical importance, as well as the competitiveness of our startups globally. So to our viewers, I'd love to see your comments below on what you think must be done to best support Canada's startups and entrepreneurs. And please sign up to TheFutureEconomy.ca's newsletter to be notified when the next episodes of the Future Forward series are released. Thanks for tuning in to the Future Forward series hosted by me, Sasha Krstic, President of Mastercard Canada.